So today we're interconnected through high-capacity information networks, but the final element in our network is more often the human mind. We've precisely defined the interfaces and information rates of our physical networks, but nature and evolution have determined the information absorbing capacities of our human mind. While we know the specs of every other part of the information chain, precise characteristics of our human interface have been largely ignored. We pride ourselves in the ability to learn new things, but when we characterize learning rate in bits per second, the evidence suggests an intrinsic and surprisingly low limit to the rate that human minds can absorb novel information. So this evening I'm going to describe the evidence and talk about the implications. We've created a global network of unbelievable information capacity and complexity, and our networks carry terabits of information. Yet ultimately what concerns us and is of value to us is what reaches us, for we're the final bit of the link. Our human mind is the final drop. And while we complain about our limited broadband connection rates, we rarely pause to consider ourselves as part of that information network. All communication requires language, and language is what makes society and civilization function. 2 million years ago, human language evolved for an imperfect channel. It had to cope with crosstalk between several voices and a noisy environment. 5,000 years ago, written text emerged in a format tolerant of imperfections. Redundancy in language was the means of overcoming errors. Digital language began in 1937 when Alec Rees introduced the idea of error-free regeneration of digital signals. A perfect channel has no errors and has no need for redundancy. Messages can be more explicit. Flowing prose could now be reduced to crude tweets or text messages. And in 1948, Claude Shannon published his famous paper, A Mathematical Theory of Communication. He described information in terms of entropy, and this is the meaning of the word I'll use when I talk about information this evening. It ignores any meaning that a message might have in a human sense. And this is different and more precise than the way we use the word information in the everyday world, where it can mean any kind of facts, details, lists, announcements from the White House. On its own, a finite amount of information cannot create more information, and duplication of information is just adding redundancy. However, with an agreement about precisely shared information, or about previously shared information, a few bits can point to a lot of information. So 10 bits could point to a particular page in any one of 1,024 pages in the Encyclopedia Britannica. As you'll see later, this is key to our ability to recognize what we're already familiar with. Shannon's theory immediately opened up new ways of understanding many disparate phenomena. When a few psychologists attempted to apply the theory to various aspects of human communication, they were shocked to discover that the information rates were remarkably low. In 1962, Karl Kampfmuller observed that all the instances in the human organism that take part in processing messages seem to be designed to an upper limit of 50 bits a second. Yet this received little attention in subsequent years. Why? Well, the numbers were so low that few believed them. Not many psychologists understood information theory. And scientists in general were getting much more interested in what goes on inside a human head. I first got interested in this 30 years ago. As Chris said, I worked on fibre optics for a long time, and part of my job was to try and dream up a reason for us continuing to make fibre carry more information. And in doing that, I found myself thinking, well, what's an application that would demand a phenomenally high information rate? So we're all familiar with the idea of hi-fi sound that could be so realistic, you can't tell it isn't real. Behind the curtain, you don't know whether there's a cello player or a couple of speakers. But in the sense of video, I found myself thinking, well, how about the ultimate hi-fi video system for TV or for virtual reality? A system that was so real that you couldn't tell the difference, you couldn't tell it wasn't real. Now currently we're 1 million miles from that. If we see however good the HD TV is, we still know it's a picture. We're not fooled by it. So I asked myself, if I want to produce a moving image that's that good, what information rate will be required to drive it? I did a quick calculation based on our eye's ability to resolve detail, shades of brightness and colours, plus the extent of the field of view and the speed of response. And I came up with a huge number, as a few other people did subsequently. This was one of the telecom providers. But initially I was delighted to have found an argument for continued research, but then I found myself thinking, well, surely vision can't work this way. And I became increasingly fascinated by the science of visual perception and began to explore how our eyes connect us with the world. So I spent a couple of years wearing eye-tracking spectacles that measured where my eyes were pointing, linked them to a computer, built a system that could tell exactly what I was looking at and when. I could control it with my eye movements alone, and I experimented with the forerunner of Google Glass a long time ago. And I became fascinated by the lack of evidence for bit rates which explained my experience of reality. So I began to investigate my connectivity to the world around us. I had to return to fibre optics after a couple of years, but the fascination I had with the limits of human perception persisted. So now, just for a minute, take a good look around you at the details in the room. You're surrounded by a high-resolution reality. A newborn baby has no idea about the world it's born into. We're born with just sufficient information to ensure our physical survival. It's rather like the DOS operating system in our PC. We arrive with the basic firmware with just sufficient knowledge to enable us to begin to learn from the world around us. Our mind is an almost empty vessel as far as information about the greater world is concerned. When we're older, we each hold a complex idea of external reality in our mind's eye. We believe that through our senses, we have a clear and immediate access to what's out there now. But I'm going to show you the evidence that the outside gets in very slowly, and that we have very low connectivity with the world. The implication is that our experience of the present moment must be an internal construct, based largely on our past experiences, merely updated with a bit of now. Now, for engineers and physicists, this is a difficult idea. When an image of the world falls on our retina, there's nothing watching it. There are just light-sensitive cells feeding signals to our brain via the optic nerve. Without direct access to the scene, we must construct our best idea of it in our mind. So it's rather like an old-school globe. It's largely out of date. The rich world we experience is merely our best understanding of so far of what's out there. I'm interested in information rates of learning. So there are two distinct kinds of learning. There's learning through our senses, and there's learning through introspection. Babies spend most of their time learning, but with the years we spend increasing time in introspection. And introspection on its own takes us nowhere. We need inputs. For the totality of what we can ever know is limited by what we take in through our senses. Through introspection, we convert previously learned information into useful insights, rules, ideas, making connections. Our senses are irrelevant in terms of introspection. We can be introspective in the darkest cave, or we can have, even if we've got locked-in syndrome, we can be introspective. But what goes on inside our heads is largely a mystery, and will probably remain so for a long time to come. So the brain is the organ, the hardware, the piece of tissue that we associate with the mind. The structure of the brain is incredibly complex. MRI scans reveal which regions of the brain use energy when we perform various mental tasks. It's rather like measuring which parts of a computer get warm when we run a particular computer program. Now, despite huge advances in brain imaging, we still have no real idea about how our brain works. It's conceivable that we can never fully understand it, because a complex system can never fully understand itself, and it can never be understood by a less complex system. I wouldn't expect my ZX81 to understand itself. The mind holds even more mysteries. It's incredibly smart, and there are many tasks that humans find easy that even supercomputers can't perform. However, despite our comparative ignorance of the contents of our skull, we can learn much from how it interacts with the world. We often use things we don't understand. Our ignorance of the internal workings of our mobile phone or a car doesn't stop us using them. But we are interested in any solid evidence of their performance, such as battery life or fuel consumption. If this talk were about sports cars, it wouldn't describe details of the internals, the pistons, fuel injection, or the electronics, nor would it describe the over-optimistic claims of the salesman or the previous owner. Instead, it would be an impartial assessment of the car's actual performance when pushed to the limit under realistic conditions, for example, top speed and acceleration. Now, I've approached the question of our human connectivity in a similar manner, focusing entirely on how we can measure performance, a black box approach which most engineers are familiar with. I'll be using some of the language of computer information. I don't want to imply that the brain works like a computer. It probably doesn't, but the analogy is a useful tool. Although we have no way of accurately measuring what happens to information inside our head, we can apply a little bit of rigorous information science to the question of our connectivity with the world around us, simply by measuring what goes in and what comes out. So let's start by seeing how well connected are our senses, what information rate we can absorb. And the rate we can absorb is fundamentally limited by the physiology of our senses. And we have a wide range of senses, but for tonight, vision is where I'll concentrate because it's where there are most surprises. So our strongest sense, in a moment I can shift my gaze from the details of my hand to a distant star millions of light years away. And previously I mentioned that our eyes can resolve incredible detail. But our human vision is not as complete as we might suppose. We often hear the phrase photographic memory, but there is no evidence for it whatsoever. This is a horizontal section through our eye, and light from the wide scene before us is imaged across the extended surface of our retina. However, only a narrow degree or so of the image, which falls on the central region, the fovea, can be seen in high resolution. Although it comprises less than 1% of the area of the retina, it feeds more than half the visual cortex in the brain, showing its crucial role in our vision. The rest of our field of view is increasingly blurred, as you'll see in the next slide. So this is a graph of our ability to resolve detail versus angle away from the central gaze. So we can only resolve fine detail over a very narrow range of angles. If you hold your thumb out at arm's length, you can't see both sides of your thumb sharply at the same time. Your eye must flick from one side to the other. Try it. So in total, it's estimated that the eye receives similar spatial information as a 0.1 megapixel digital camera. But the pixels are concentrated around the central region, so our peripheral vision is always blurred. A point of gaze is a bit like the white cane used by the blind. In order to experience a detailed view, our eyes unconsciously flick around the scene. They pick out the important details and gradually build up a sharp image in our mind's eye. You can experience these flicks yourself if you close one eye and place 3 middle fingers on top of the closed eyelid, and keeping your head still, look around the room with the other eye. You should be able to feel the flicks as your eye moves in these little jerks. And we're completely unaware of what our eyes are doing. They have a life of their own, basically. And here's an illusion to demonstrate the fact. How many black dots do you see here?
Oh, 3. Oh.
There's 12.
They're flicking on and off.
Now, what happens, of course, is that you only see the structure with a dot and a ring when you focus on it. When the point of gaze moves away from it, you see an average of the black and the white, the black of the dot and the white of the ring, and that averages to the same grey as the background. And I could do the opposite of that. You count the dots. There are actually no black dots in this image. Because we can only resolve detail with the very centre of our gaze, we can only see one word at a time in sufficient detail when we read. Most things that we see in life still provide some meaning when they're blurred, the face, for example. Text is very different. Most words, when blurred, provide negligible information. So we have to gaze directly at a word to be able to read it. How many F's are there in this line of text? Any suggestions? So we only read words that our mind thinks it needs to read. We tend to skip words like off, which is why proofreading is so difficult. The information capacity of the eye has been measured in two different ways. First, from measurements of its visual performance by ophthalmologists, which suggest a figure around 6 megabits a second. And secondly, from studies of the neural connectivity from the eye to the brain by neurologists, and this suggests a figure around 10 megabits a second. This comparatively low figure represents a fundamental limit in our ability to recognize what we're already familiar with. That is the ultimate limit of the information capacity that we can respond to with our mind. But soon I'll reveal that our capacity to learn from what we sense is far, far less. You may have noticed the blind spot labelled in a couple of the earlier slides. Well, a blind spot gives a bit of a clue to a more significant limitation in our connectivity. This is a photo of my retina showing the tiny fovea which provides detailed vision. The region to its left is where the blood vessels enter and exit the eye, and the optic nerve exits the eye. There are no light-sensitive cells in that region, so we're completely blind in that part of our retina. The blind spot on our retina makes the eye blind over a patch in the scene around 14 degrees away from our centre of gaze. When we use both eyes, one eye covers the blind spot in the other. So if we want to locate it, we must first close one eye. Now, viewing this image from the appropriate distance can reveal our blind spot. If you cover your right eye, focus on the spot on the right with your left eye. If your viewing distance is about twice the width of the screen, you should be able to make the flashing red rabbit disappear completely. As you're probably all sitting further back, try looking at the dot and moving your point of gaze further over to the right. So I don't know if any of you can see that, but you should have no awareness of anything red and flashing at that point. So our mind fills in the hole in our vision with content similar to what surrounds it. And this exercise shows that we're not aware of blind spots until our attention is brought to them. So to summarize so far, we don't physically sense everything that we experience visually, for our eyes are biologically incapable of doing so. In addition, we're generally unaware of where our eyes are gazing and picking out detail. Lastly, which eye do you see the world through? Now we have two eyes, each with its own point of view. If you point at something with your finger, then try viewing with each eye on its own. You'll find that one eye is dominant, probably. So if you just try pointing and then close one eye or the other, you'll find that one of your eyes is the one you choose for that lining up. But actually somehow we construct a single view as if it's an eye halfway between the two eyes. So we've seen some of the capacity limitations of our senses, and now I'll show you how our central processor limits our connectivity. Our brain is a surprisingly slow learner. The rate we can absorb and retain information is severely constrained by the complex mental processes running within the hardware of our brain. We may think we're very observant, but it's surprisingly difficult to notice some things when we first see an image. And when we have seen them, we can't understand how we could have possibly missed them. So I'm going to show a couple of examples of mind blindness. So I'm going to show you something that reveals our blindness to change. This is change blindness. If you've seen these examples before, don't give the game away. I'm going to show you a pair of near identical images and switch back and forth between them. Raise your hand when you spotted the difference. 2, 3. It's the engine. If you're an expert in engines, you would have spotted it early. But don't ever fly in a plane that doesn't have it. It takes a surprisingly long time to spot that. Yet it's afterwards it seems so obvious. Right, let's see if we can get another one going. Right, let's see if we can get that going. Yeah. So it's this thing.
saw it till you flashed it.
So quite difficult to see those things. I mean, it's I've actually done a little trick with these in that I flash grey, a neutral grey, between those two images. The reason I do that is that with our retina is very sensitive to change. And in fact, if you see a kestrel hovering, what it's doing is just staring and waiting till everything fades away and waiting till the little mouse moves, and then it highlights in the image. So, so I had to suppress that mechanism, but by putting a grey, flashing grey between them, the whole retina sees change. Your brain's having to do the work rather than your retina. So, so these images are quite complex. So how do we get on with a very simple image? This contains just 80 black and white blocks, so that's 80 bits of information. I'm going to switch between them quite slowly to make it easier for you. So focus all your attention on the 80 blocks and raise your hand when you spot which blocks are changing. So it's remarkable how little we take in. Similar phenomenon is inattentional blindness. Again, some of you will have seen this before. This is where concentration on one thing makes our mind blind to other things that our senses sense. This is a short video in which 6 people pass basketballs around. I want you to count the number of times the people wearing the white shirts pass the ball. So, how many times? Did you all see the gorilla? So yeah, when this experiment, a lot of people never see the gorilla. So I've shown examples of our limited ability to directly experience the reality before our eyes. It's evident we learn information quite slowly, but just how slow? Now, in the past, there's been very little interest in the rate of human learning, the rate that we absorb new information. In fact, quite the opposite. We have many tests of memory recall, so exams and quizzes, but these only measure what's already been learned. They measure the speed and extent of what can be recalled. There's been little interest in whether the material was learned within 5 minutes or over 5 years. So these are tests of memory, retrieval and understanding rather than learning ability. As a communication engineer, I'd like to know the bit rate at which the mind is capable of being connected to the word, the maximum rate at which I can learn something new. There are 2 measurement problems. The first, what can we measure? And the second, how can we distinguish between what's entirely new information and what's already known? Let's look at the first. If we can quantify the rate in bits per second, we'll be able to compare learning rates for different kinds of information. So we simply need to measure the number of bits absorbed and over a measured time. For example, this case, you've got ones and zeros used to describe an image. So this little 100 pixel image is 100 bits being drawn at 10 bits a second. The second measurement problem is determining what's truly novel information. How to distinguish between the process of recognizing what's already familiar and the process of learning what's completely new to us. As we grow and learn, we increasingly rely on what we already know. When we're old and consider ourselves wise, we may mistakenly think we don't need to learn anything. If we're to measure the true rate of learning, we must either differentiate between what's novel and what's already known, or we measure using completely unpredictable information. The former is difficult. Generally, we can't estimate what is known. We don't know what experience someone's had. We have no way of knowing what's already in someone's mind. So I'm going to describe 3 sources of evidence. The first 2 are measures of conscious learning. So one is we're going to look at the maximum bit rate of language. The second is to look at the performances of mental athletes. And the third case is a case of unconscious learning, where we're looking at the information rate of physical skills which require visual monitoring. So what about language? Our spoken and written language has evolved to include a lot of redundancy. So you could probably read that paragraph if you don't try to read it very carefully. So scan reading is easier than reading it carefully. Our ability to successfully interpret text with many errors in any position is what makes predictive text possible and what makes it hazardous. In 1951, Claude Shannon applied his ideas to estimating the degree of redundancy in various spoken and written languages. Through experiments, he found out that the message could be communicated over a perfect digital channel with as little as 1 bit per character, which is far less than might be expected from the number of symbols in the alphabet. From this, he estimated that human language cannot communicate faster than a few tens of bits per second, either through speech or by text. Attempts to communicate faster leads to increased errors. So this gives a useful estimate of the maximum learning rate, but it's only approximate, because we cannot know what's already known in the communication. Any kind of sentence that makes sense, we have a way of interpreting that in terms of what we already know. To overcome this problem, to get a more accurate measure, we want to use information that's totally unpredictable, with no discernible pattern, or information that appears completely random to the learners. Reading and remembering random text is very difficult. Let me just show you an example. So try and remember these random 4-letter words. Right, so how many did you remember? So 5 was pretty obvious. Sometimes people remember Tayex and Jusad because they look a little bit like words, but that's about as well as you can do, really. Yeah, so those are the ones that people remember, if anything. So I'd like to measure the absolute limit of learning capacity, just like the performance of my sports car. To determine any limit of human performance, we could do no better than to make it a competition and celebrate the winners. In international athletic events, top competitors achieve very similar performances. Indeed, anyone found to exceed the record by a few percent would immediately be suspected of cheating. Fortunately, there's a community of mental athletes out there who regularly compete at international level. Most events are tests of memory speed. Others use mental arithmetic tests. Some use symbols which we can characterize in terms of the number of bits. We can calculate the number of bits per symbol from the number of possibilities. So for example, on average, each card in a pack of 52 playing cards needs 5.7 bits. 6 bits would have covered 64 possibilities. So in principle, we can calculate the bits per second for each of these events from the number of symbols divided by the total time taken. A typical event requires competitors to rapidly memorize random sequences of symbols and time doing so. They have no idea what's coming, so they're having to learn completely novel information. Their accuracy is confirmed when they subsequently recall what they've memorized, but without the time pressure. Note that the memory athletes are doing 2 things. They're learning information from outside, which is the thing I'm interested in, and memorizing it, which is an internal process. For the longer duration events, much longer sequences must be memorized, and so those longer events are dominated by the process of memorizing. It's the shorter events that particularly interest us. Here I've plotted the corresponding bit rates for a wide range of memory records. The set of points on the right were events lasting an hour. Notice the closeness of points for different symbol types, for binary, decimal, and playing cards. The bit rates for long events are significantly reduced because the internal memorizing task dominates. But the shorter events are starting to give a clue to the maximum learning rates in bits per second. you'll notice that the highest learning speed we got was 14 bits a second, and this was achieved for the more complex symbols of playing cards. Recognizing symbols and images has been important to us for more than 1 million years. Perhaps recognizing digits is too recent a skill for evolution to have optimized the process. So that's a possible explanation for why playing cards scored so high on that. Let me just show you some examples to give you an idea of how fast the champions do at this kind of thing. So this is the world record speed for binary symbols. Oh, it didn't run, right. This is playing cards at 2 cards a second. 21 playing cards, so 21 seconds to memorize a pack of cards is pretty fast. That's faster than two card images a second. When we examine the records of very short duration events, say 4 seconds or less, we see something rather odd. Here I've plotted the total number of bits memorized versus time, and extrapolating to 0 suggests that we absorb finite information in 0 time, which is obviously ridiculous. However, it seems we can take in a few bits of information with the briefest glance, provided we're not immediately distracted afterwards. We retrospectively read what went into our short-term memory. So a point worth remembering is that we can learn about 50 bits worth of information with the briefest glance. Those are our memory champions. We get much closer to measuring a limit of our learning capability when we look at the bit rates for fast maths champions when performing simple mental addition. The reason is that it's easier to keep track of a small running sum than to have to memorize these longer sequences of digits. So one of these events is to add a sequence of 100 single digits. Only the running sum needs to be memorized, and this is typically 2 digits, so not a lot to be remembered. So the major process is taking information in and doing that little calculation. And the 2 different competitors at 2 different times achieve these figures, 17.3, 17.7 bits a second, remarkably close. The more difficult event required the competitors to add 10-digit numbers 10 times. Don't know how they dream these things up. Anyway, just to test them out. That's 1,000 digits input and around 100 digits to be memorized. And again with this one, 2 different, again, competitors, 2 different occasions as well, achieved 16.7 and 19.4 bits per second. So the fact that 4 different competitors achieve learning rates within a few percent of each other and on different occasions all suggests a fundamental limit to our learning rate. And I believe that's a direct consequence of our common brain physiology, in the same way that sprinters, top sprinters, have similar performances. I mean, trust me, these guys practice a lot. They probably don't do much else in their lives, but they spend a lot of time getting these figures. And when amateurs try and do these things, it's ridiculous how slow we are compared with them. So let's summarize so far. Despite having searched for decades, I've found no rigorous evidence for learning rates faster than a few tens of bits per second. But I have found nothing. I mean, there are plenty of people who have ideas that we take in massive amounts of information. But there's no evidence for it. There's a lot of people say, oh, we take in a lot subconsciously. But there is no evidence. And it just makes us feel better to think that we're taking it all in somehow. So some of you might be thinking, what about savants, child prodigies, people like Rain Man? Surely they learn faster than this. Well, it appears not. Daniel Temmet, who is a prodigious savant, he's also competed in these world championships. He's competitive, but holds no world records, and I think his best result was probably half as fast as the top people. Some of the most consistent evidence for learning bit rate limit has come from things we do. And this, to me, initially was a big surprise to me. And I think from things we do when we interact with the world physically. So that might seem a bit counterintuitive because that's like information going out. Most physical things we do are develop skills. and some perfected skills need little or no monitoring whatsoever. We do them unconsciously. For example, breathing, walking, and sometimes a familiar journey home by car. On the other hand, tasks which require monitoring, such as threading a needle, depend on our ability to learn to absorb information while we're doing it. Some years ago, Paul Fitz, who worked in the Laboratory of Aviation Psychology in Ohio, was intrigued to learn that the total time to write individual letters by hand is independent of the size of the letters, whether large or small. He wanted to find out how to optimize the layout of aircraft controls for the fastest response. So he devised a whole series of manual dexterity experiments in which he could vary the accuracy required and measure the speed at which different subjects perform these skills. Now this is just one of those experiments. For this particular task, he instructed competitive male students to tap back and forth with a stylus, hitting two metal strips without making errors. So this is the original image of basically strips with a certain spacing and a certain width. He timed the performance over a wide range of conditions. He varied the width of the strips, the spacing, and the weight of the stylus. Now the narrower the target and the wider the spacing, the greater the difficulty. And inspired by Shannon's information theory, he characterized the degree of difficulty in bits. He discovered something very surprising. The measured performance over a vast range of conditions and with different subjects was almost constant at around 8 bits a second. Even more surprising was that it hardly changed at all when he increased the weight of the stylus from 1 ounce to 1 pound. If the speed were indeed limited by muscular strength, he'd expect a factor of 128 times difference between the extreme test cases of weight and displacement. Yet he got a difference of just 5%. Subsequent experiments have revealed almost identical results for foot and head movements. So this all suggests that the performance in bits per second we see is determined by something other than the speed, strength, and agility of our limbs. The results of these experiments are famously enshrined in a thing called Fitt's law, which in essence states that the time to perform an action is directly proportional to the relative precision required. It's become the most widely used rule in the design of human-machine interfaces, such as buttons or links on web pages, in this example. Despite its successful application, many have struggled and failed to explain Fitt's law through low-level mechanisms, and it's remained unexplained until now. But the idea of a learning bottleneck does provide an explanation as follows. The task required the subjects to use their internal conceptual model of the experiment out there in order to complete each step. Every time the subject attempts to hit one of the two targets with the stylus, they can only continue when they consciously know they've hit the target. To know they've landed on the target, they must interpret the two-dimensional information sensed through their eyes as a three-dimensional mental model of the experiment. And they do this by continually updating the internal simulation of the external scene, by learning from it in real time. The subject showed little improvement or negligible improvement in performance over several days of testing, which was a bit of a surprise. Why not? Well, if subjects were asked to go as fast as possible and to make negligible errors in missing the targets, and these are two conflicting goals. If we remove the real-time learning from this physical skill, then practice enables it to be performed much faster. Now there are some brave souls who, aided by alcohol and bravado, perform a trick known as the knife game. It involves quickly stabbing between the fingers of one hand, usually with a knife to indicate just how much of a man you are. And the Fitt's law does not apply because they can do it blindfold. In other words, they're doing it without learning, with no learning in real time. And consequently, it's much faster. These brave folk practice extensively and use errors to improve their accuracy and speed. You may notice there's some signs of blood on one of some of the fingers. So it just shows how fast you could do these things, because there's no learning, no real-time learning involved. That's a learned pattern. These traverses are independent of the distance or the accuracy, so it's as fast on a small movement as it is for a long movement. So let's summarise what we've learned so far. The richness of the world we personally experience is equivalent to a vast information rate. But due to biological limitations, our eyes are physically incapable of sensing most of what we think we're experiencing. But most significantly, we can mentally only absorb a tiny fraction of what's new within the sensed information. Even under pressure, we can't learn from our surroundings at more than a few tens of bits per second. And that's our learning bottleneck. So this is a logarithmic chart, covers 12 decades of bit rates. Here we have, I spent most of my life working on optical fiber communications. And this is where you could say the visual experience is equivalent to that in some sense. And here we have around 10 megabits, 6 to 10 megabits, eyes to brain. There's an equivalent figure here for hearing. But of course, whether it's hearing or seeing or any other sense, the rate we can absorb that information is still down in the tens of bits per second. These maximum learning rates appear to be similar between competitive individuals when performing similar tasks, and just like the sprinters getting similar performances. I'd expect maximum learning rates to differ somewhat depending on the complexity of the task. So learning decimal numbers seems to be a bit easier than learning as part of a spatial skill. So these very high rates for playing cards, for example. So what are the implications of being able to learn at such a low rate? Well, if we spent a whole life absorbing information, the totality of what we learn would fit on one DVD. And even this assumes that we spend all the time learning and absolutely no time dealing with what we've learned. Does this seem too little to explain our life? Well, through introspection, we can do clever things with information. We create powerful predictive science from what we learn. So we can produce some engineering design rules and build a whole load of different bridges. Equally, the Mandelbrot set in fractals shows fairly simple source of information can create infinite complexity in this case. What about education? In many ways, the traditional process of education is already highly optimized. The phrase "to read for a degree" implies that the study of written text is considered an efficient and effective strategy for learning, especially when combined with listening to lectures. For new information, language forms the primary conduit to the student's mind. However, images can be more effective when communicating graphical and spatial material. It also reinforces some existing messages. More is not necessarily good. Information is like food. When there's too little, we urgently demand more. And when there's overabundance, we need to be a bit more discriminating, demanding tasty morsels which are easy to digest. And I think that's true with information. We've come through a time of thinking more information is good for us, but actually we need to process that in a way to optimize the channel in a sense. And the rapid skills experiments remind us that if we punish errors, learning is suppressed. What does 20 bits per second tell us about seeing? Well, most of the time we're experiencing things we're familiar with and fail to note that our partner has a new hairstyle for the last 3 weeks. But if we were to see something entirely new, we would be able to see very little of the truth. This is a high-resolution image of myself. And here's the same image, but using just 60 bits of information, which is all we could absorb in just a few seconds of observation. And I think you'd agree that 60 bits doesn't create a very good image of me. You're probably thinking, well, this is nonsense. I can see faces quite clearly with just a glance. If we already knew a similar number of faces, 60 bits would potentially, if we knew a vast number of faces, 60 bits would potentially allow us to identify which one. So when we see a new face, you recognize aspects that match your memories of similar faces and identifies which faces are closest match. So we often notice that a new face reminds us of someone else. And being broadly familiar with faces, our narrow point of gaze and attention is focused on key aspects, such as the eyes, nose and mouth. And on the right there's a plot of someone's point of gaze when they're gazing at the image of the face on the left. The parts they focus on are crucial information as they enable us to quickly estimate how this person feels towards us. And we may not notice the hairstyle, for example. But what if we had a completely alien encounter? And we're presented with something completely new to us, absolutely nothing from the past that would be familiar. What we saw would be limited by that narrow learning bottleneck of around 10 bits a second. So it would take a long time to be able to see with any detail. So after 13 seconds, you'd see that. 51 seconds. 5 minutes, starting to get something. Half an hour. And 2 hours, the good old orangutan. Now, for obvious reasons, I couldn't find a photo of something completely alien. But if we had a brief encounter with something completely alien to us, our imagination is likely to interfere and present us with something humanoid but different. The implications for psychology and philosophy are huge, as it provides robust evidence for the top-down model of perception and for the sense of subjectivity of most of our experience. It builds on the idea that prediction is what makes us humans special. However, this is really a topic for a different audience. But I will say there is neurological evidence that our experience of visual perception is based more on signals coming down from the cortex than from our eyes. People looking at there's much more information. When we see things, there's much more information from the cortex than from our retinas. So let's summarize what we know. In our mind's eye, we hold an idea of what's out there, and this has been constructed from our accumulated experience of the world out there. When we sense something, our mind compares it with an inner idea of it and slowly learns the difference, continually updating our mind's eye. While our experience of the moment is equivalent to many millions of megabits a second, we are only in touch in the moment with a few tens of bits per second at most. Finally, I'm going to dare to look at what the future might hold. And any predictions of the future are usually wrong, but so let's look at what the future might hold for our learning bottleneck. Could we widen it? Could we increase our learning speed? Now, there's no Moore's law for our biology. It's already highly optimized through millions of years of evolution. If our brain was an electronic computer, we would have seen its speed and memory capacity increase exponentially with time, doubling every 2 years or whatever. But it isn't. We use the same antiquated brain technology or biology that the apes used 25 million years ago. Unlike our PCs, there have been no significant upgrades to our processors' hardware capabilities since humans first became conscious. It's unlikely we could significantly increase the speed of our neurons either. We can't simply increase the clock speed as we do in computers. What about if we had bigger brains? Well, you've probably noticed that brain size doesn't correlate with intelligence. The university entrance exam doesn't take account of hat size, and only the foolhardy would argue that women's smaller brains make them less intelligent. Indeed, the phrase big-headed is used to describe someone's ego rather than their intelligence. What about interfacing with the brain directly, using electronic connections to it? Many science fiction stories explore the idea of giving humans amazing mental powers through some bolt-on electronics. This seductive idea is based on the illusion that our brain has excess unused processing capacity and is merely lacking some fast inputs. Elon Musk, father of the Tesla electric car and the SpaceX rocket, he recently been expounding that we'll soon be merging with artificial intelligence via an array of electrodes in the cortex, what he calls a neural lace, an array of electrodes. But brain science is not rocket science. It's far more complex and contains far more unknowns. Remember that we're stuck with the limitations of our biological computer, so there seems little opportunity to increase the information capacity of our interconnection in the future. The only way forward could be to migrate human intelligence into an intelligent electronic machine. do, however, is provide ourselves with completely new sensors for sensations beyond our normal senses, for ultraviolet light, for Wi-Fi or something like that, or smells that we don't normally have any interest in. Our limited learning capacity is excellent news for those with impaired sensory capabilities. Because the bit rates are so low, I see no reason why technology shouldn't be developed to provide performance which equals that of able-bodied people. We already see the beginnings of this with cochlear and retinal implants for the deaf and the blind. It's worth noting that when these connections are made, they're made to the sensor's nerves rather than directly to our brain tissue. The reason is that we know something of the interface spec within the sensors, and our brains already have an expectation of how to interpret the signals from our sensors. So that makes it's very different from just bolting some wires onto the cortex. Paradoxically, our superior intelligence probably causes us to have a narrower learning bottleneck than other less intelligent creatures, because a bigger world view requires more processing. So those of you who have been involved in simulating systems will know that the more complex a simulation, the slower it grinds away, and you end up with things that have to be run for weeks because you've got a comprehensive model. So here's a good demonstration of this. So this is a chimp who's been taught to do all sorts of things, and he's doing a memory test. Basically, these numbers flash up, and he has to remember where they are and the sequence of them, so that after they've been hidden by the white square, he can tap the screen in the order they are. See? Okay. And he gets a reward, probably, if he gets it right. Now here's a human trying to do it. Maybe a bit simpler. So this chimp has very significantly beaten the British world memory champion, the guy who did the famous, the very high speed thing with remembering the playing cards. He was really slow with this. And the point about this is that when chimps see a number, they see a symbol. When we see a digital symbol within a scheme, but we see a digital symbol in a scheme of counting. So we can't look at a number 7 without knowing it has a context in a sequence of numbers. And we certainly, when we look at a number 17, that's quite a complex thing, whereas the chimp isn't bothered by that, he just sees this symbol. So the size of our world view is the thing that slows us down. Consider the task of catching flies. A dragonfly with such a simple brain, has such a simple brain, it's fast enough to catch flies in real time. It does it on the fly, as they say. And it just weaves and dives, and it could do it. We humans are too slow to do it in real time. It's like grabbing with our hand. But we can devise a tool, a fly trap that will do the task for us tomorrow. So that's the difference between a small, unintelligent creature that has its fast response, and in some ways we are very slow because of our intellect, but we can predict things, we can anticipate things. And perhaps there's a message here for robot design. In comparison with biological life, robot mechanisms benefit from very high-speed electronic processing. However, it probably is still true that the larger their worldview, the slower will be their speed of learning. So an autonomous military drone will have faster responses if it's unaware of the broader context of its mission. Do we want to optimize our robots for speed, or offer a more considered response? A self-driving car with a worldview that includes global warming and my personal health might decide after lengthy consideration that my journey is best not made at all and refuse to take me to the pub. Our human brains are powerful processor of information. I say it can do some amazing tasks, but the connectivity to the rest of the world is very small. It's as if we're supercomputers connected to the internet via slow dial-up modems. So we have limited connectivity between individuals, but we are successful with cooperating with each other. And when we cooperate, we can achieve far more than we can as individuals. Now, physically, in a simple way, this is true. 10 men pulling a rope in a tug of war or roughly 10 times greater than one man. And when people cooperate in a complex task, the results can be much greater than the sum of the parts, especially when each brings different skills and experiences. Minds connected through language have enabled the great projects and given us civilization and culture. However, the combined intellectual power of several minds do not add linearly. It's not like a tug of war. 10 people working on an intellectual problem do not exhibit a joint IQ 10 times that of the individuals. Human society is a network of creative minds, interconnected at a surprisingly low information rate. Perhaps that is what maintains our individuality. However, when it comes to discovering completely new insights, the initial step is almost always taken by a single gifted individual working largely alone. No completely new idea can be conceived that initially is bigger than one single mind alone, just as no child can be born of more than one mother. Network minds can subsequently build on new ideas. But there's really only one who cries Eureka. A recent article in New Scientist magazine described the entire human race as a single multiprocessor computer. If so, it's one based on a multitude of very high performance processors with extremely low interconnectivity. And we know this isn't an optimum configuration for such a system, as it limits the ability of the processors or minds to share tasks. So our powerful intellect is what separates us, whilst less intelligent creatures like shoals of fish or flocks of starlings are more suited to collaborative problem solving. We're seeing the development of a single intelligent global network with vast databases, interconnected billions of times faster than humans can connect. The potential for problem solving could be on an unimaginable scale, but this raises a question about the future of intelligent life. Our learning bottleneck is determined by the limitations of our brain biology, so this could limit further evolution of intelligent biological life. Perhaps intelligent life has reached its destination. Alternatively, if this evolution is destined to continue beyond the constraints of our biology, the answer could be to migrate our human intelligence into a single intelligent global data network, the end of the line for DNA. It might soon become the most intelligent life form on the planet, and then where would we be? This evening I've taken you on a journey through some very different areas. I've revealed the remarkably limited rate at which any of us can learn something new, our learning bottleneck. I've shown how we have significantly greater capacity for recognizing things we're familiar with. I hope you found some of this thought-provoking. Much of what you've heard will seem counterintuitive, as there are widespread myths of our ability to absorb and remember information. Our learning bottleneck has huge implications, both technically and personally, for it transforms our ideas about what we sense in the moment and what we remember from our past. Perhaps the most challenging aspect for us as hard-nosed engineers and physicists is that it suggests we are immersed within our own unique idea of the world about us. That all our objectivity is subjective, that we're not in direct and immediate contact with the rich world we experience around us. Now, as social creatures and scientists, we cannot function effectively if we're preoccupied with this idea. So in our day-to-day life, we must ignore many of these truths revealed here and continue to live with the illusion of a shared, solid, objective world out there. If you'd like to learn more, I've bought a few copies of my book, Bottleneck, Our Human Interface with Reality. Alternatively, both the e-book and the print version are available directly from Amazon, and I'll leave some cards if anybody wants to take one of those away. And there's a website with a load of things on it too.